So, today I'm going to talk about the energy of conviction and how it can be really helpful in your healing journey and in claiming your divinity and in embodying yourself as a liberated soul. Um, and sometimes the energy of the softer, more feminine aspect of love, compassion, and mercy, if we lean solely in that direction, sometimes without discipline, even and without conviction, sometimes a pattern will not resolve itself because actually the lesson it's trying to teach us is to develop a certain quality, right? And actually, it's interesting because I've been talking about this for a while. And just yesterday, I heard something about the law of one, which I tried to listen to, and I just couldn't. I don't have memory. Like, as soon as I learn something and it becomes integrated, I kind of forget about it. And stuff with like more scientific language doesn't land with me really. So it's like, that's why I just channel everything. I don't teach other religious things or philosophical things. I just teach what's been real for me because it's really my only option. But I was listening to a conversation about the law of one, and Ra, the being that's being channeled in the law of one, talks about how some and again, this is a synchronicity to like validate the things that have been felt authentic to me. But he says that like there are some beings that are fourth density that were really mastering love. There's some that are fifth density, like the Buddha, which are balancing love and wisdom, which is everything that I'm talking about. And when I said like some people or some beings come into the world having already to at least a certain level like mastered the energy of love, maybe what they're actually learning is to incorporate or balance love with wisdom. Maybe that's not you, and maybe what I'm about to say isn't helpful to you, and so tune out of it. What I share is to help you. And so if it doesn't help you, then just tune out, right? It's what I say is not going to apply to everyone. So the energy of conviction. So I want to talk about the ego for a second, and ways I talk about it in different ways, but you may or may not have heard me mention the term trickster energy. And so many people describe the ego as just like the survival mind that's trying to survive, help you survive. Like it's just an innocent thing that's trying to help you survive. And ultimately it is, and everything is in service of God, right? God created good and evil. God created everything. God is everything. And so it's not that the ego is evil, but if you experience like really intense influxes of light, energy, insight, and then you experience like the ego fighting back, right? That's just a fact. It's a fact that it fights back, and it fights back in subtle ways, because what's actually happening is that we're going from a solar plexus consciousness of like, I am separate from life and others, right? Survival consciousness, and we're seeing life from a new perspective, which is that all is myself, like all is love. And so of course this thing is going to resist, right? And you can call that whatever you want. You can call that autopilot. You can call that the survival mind. You can call that the ego. You can call that the trickster. Whatever is helpful to you, so that you can get smart and hip to the way that it works, and you can utilize the appropriate qualities and energy that you might need to go beyond it. And of course, love and compassion. Like when you feel a trigger, of course, love and compassion, learning how to feel something completely, to be completely in the present moment and feel it, right? That's bringing it into the heart. That's meeting that energy with compassion. However, sometimes, and somebody just emailed me this morning describing an issue they're having where they kind of fall back into depression, into nostalgia over and over and over again in a really intense way. And so I want to talk about what I call the trickster in us. And I'm going to define the trickster as the part of your mind, it's the part of the survival mind that kind of tries to seduce you back into a low state of energy. Now, fundamentally, is it an innocent thing that probably started acting that way because it was hurt? Well, yeah, but it's also the separate self, right? The history, the thousands of years that we've been believing we're separate and needing to kill and dominate our environment. Like, yes, like it ultimately is for the purpose of survival, but it also can be quite violent and aggressive. So basically, sometimes the trickster in us can like seduce us back into a nostalgic state, a sad state. And I'm going to give you a real example. So let's say you had a divorce and it was really painful. And of course, there's like a grieving period and maybe an angry period and a blameful period. There, you go through all of these levels of grief, stages of healing. And then, but then like a certain amount of time passes, you've been through that cycle, and then part of your mind says like, oh, turn on the wedding song, turn on the song that we danced to. You know, it's like, that would be the trickster. The trickster is saying, come back into low energy, come back into nostalgia. Now you can think of that as the survival mind trying to help you survive, but wait a minute, how is that trying to help you survive? By staying sad and nostalgic? It's keeping you in low energy. So you can call it by name, whatever name you want to give it, but to see it clearly for what it is, it does fight back. It does resist. And one of the ways it resists is to make you fall back into or slip back into things that keep you sad, things that keep you blameful. In that situation, if you went through a breakup or a divorce and maybe like it was really traumatizing and maybe enough time has passed, you've been through the grief process, but maybe like your mind is saying like, oh, go look at pictures of them on Instagram. Or it's like, that would be the trickster in you. So to have conviction and say, I see that what you're doing, and ultimately the trickster is trying to teach us how to have conviction, how to rise like the phoenix, how to rise out of, how to get smarter than it. Because part of the transition from this to this, part of that transition, it's not only the love and compassion, it's also getting smart and just seeing how it works and being smarter than it, because we're upgrading our program, our operating system, and that requires a new level of wisdom. So, okay, the trickster, right? One of the ways that it can manifest is, I'm going to give you like some more subtle examples. Okay, one of the ways that it can manifest is to kind of entice you into staying in a fantasy land. So for me, that used to look like, okay, I didn't want to feel something with compassion meets an energy that was happening in the present moment with compassion. So part of my mind would say, oh, play this like trippy, like psychedelic music and like just go into fantasy land. And actually, when I did a Rohan process, when I received Rohan, which is a service that I provide, one of the processes, you literally draw like what your mind shows you, and then you look at your drawing intuitively, and your intuitive mind tells you a sentence of like what the mind is trying to show you to help you understand what you're stuck in. And basically, I don't remember what the sentence was, but I drew like myself like floating in water, like totally numbed out. And so we don't have judgment or harshness, right? When we recognize like, oh, I see I'm floating back into that tank of water now. I see my mind is seducing me back into that pool of water. To like rise up and say like, no, to have conviction and say like, no, not today. Like today, I'm going to try something different. I'm going to try being present. I'm going to try putting my hands on my belly with compassion, with love, right? So to utilize that conviction, that wisdom to say, I'm not going to fall back into that place today. Not today. I see it happening, and it's just not going to be, that's just not what I'm going to do today, right? So to have conviction is extremely healing. Because when you exercise conviction, you're teaching your subconscious, like, I'm strong, I'm empowered. I don't give my power away to blame. I don't give my power away to sadness. I don't give my power away to any kind of state of energy that's anything less than peace and love. One of the ways, okay, and this, I understand that what I'm saying might trigger some people, and honestly, I'm not here to make friends, and I'm not here to be approved of. I'm here to help you. And so again, if this is helpful or if it's not helpful, you have to choose that for yourself. But one of the major things that I learned about the psyche, especially if you're one of those beings who really came in anchored with a really deep sense of compassion, that process that I mentioned to you, where you draw like what your mind shows you, and then your intuition like tells you a sentence. I've mentioned this before, but I drew a room where I was a baby in a crib, and there was a mobile, like, you know, the mobiles over the cribs, and the mobile had different symbols, like a Star of David, a cross, like all these religious symbols. And so what it was telling me was like, oh, all these religious ideas are dangling over my innocence, right? And I'm falling for them. And my intuition, when I pointed to the heart, which is one of the symbols on the mobile, I asked my intuition, what does this represent about the energy that I'm stuck in? And the sentence was, idiot compassion keeps me fractured. So what is idiot compassion? Idiot compassion is compassion at the exclusion of wisdom. Compassion that when you exercise this kind of compassion, the results, the fruits of it is that you continue to be abused, you continue to stay stuck in situations that aren't healthy for you, etc., etc. So to me, like, I was at the beginning of my awakening, I was doing the Course in Miracles, I was in a state of being that was so blissful, and I was seeing angel lights coming out of everyone's eyes. But then when the rubber hits the road in the relationship that I was in, even though I was around somebody who was actually very, very harmful to me, right? And I was seeing the love of him, and I was observing him as God, as creator, like that alone didn't actually get me out of the situation. What got me out of the situation, and I endured many unpleasant circumstances before this actually happened, but what actually got me out of the situation was raising my energy and having conviction and making a decision and saying, I know you're the creator. I know you're a soul. I know we're co-creating this whole experience together for each other in love, but I'm out of here, right? Conviction. Enough is enough. Enough is enough. The power to actually realize you can choose something. You can choose to leave. You are free, right? So how does this apply to like inner healing? Well, if you notice, right, if those dangling carrots are, and this is from like lifetimes of spiritual conditioning, of religious conditioning, like learning about unconditional love and even being a martyr. Idiot compassion can be likened to being a martyr, and that martyr energy is a trickster energy. It's an archetype in the mind that keeps the separate mind going. Is it actually against you from the bigger picture? No, it's trying to help you wake up. But that being said, you have to get smart to the way that it works. One of the tricksters is the lover. You can think of the trickster as anything that, any energy in your mind that ultimately hurts you, ultimately blurs your discernment. So let's say you have the lover, the trickster energy of the lover archetype. And so you're a really discerning, sharp tool, right? You're a sharp crayon in the box. You got a good head on your shoulders. You know, you have your shit together, so to speak. But then, okay, somebody comes into your experience and like you fall head over heels in love with them, and all of a sudden like you might not be able to discern like that they are actually probably not good for you, right? There's all kinds of red flags, there's all kinds of evidence, but because there is this lover archetype in you that is kind of like, it's kind of like putting a fog over your discernment, like that's one of your tricksters. So if you have some self-knowledge and say like, okay, I tend to in relationship like put images on other people put them on pedestals, make them like these amazing beings, like instead of actually just being still and tuning into reality, like, and actually just seeing something for what it is. Because if you don't see something for what it is, in the relative sense, like the way it's showing up right now, you don't have free will and you can't make choices, because what's actually making choices is that trickster energy, is that fog that's over your discernment. So the martyr is another classic example of the trickster, right? How do I sacrifice myself? How do I love others? How do I even apply the spiritual teaching of unconditional love to others at the exclusion of myself? The savior is another classic one. How do I remain in really unpleasant or really hurtful relationships at the exclusion of helping myself? And yes, these are strategies we learned as children and in other lives. These are strategies that ultimately helped us survive, but what happens is they can take on a certain momentum where, I don't know if you've ever listened to the work of Abraham Hicks, but this thing that they say really resonates with me, and it's kind of a fact of quantum physics. When people ask, like, is there such thing as the devil? It's like, no, it's just a spin-off of man's mind, but every vibration exists, and actually thoughts think. Thoughts attract unto themselves, and thoughts think. So if part of you, right, like because you were a child and you were violated, let's say you were violated. I'll give you an example from me, because knowing that I'm never coming from judgment, I'm coming from experience. So a part of me was violated, and so the innocence left that part of my mind, right? I no longer felt safe in several vulnerable situations. So what entered me was like a kind of dominatrixy energy, that where like I would control situations, especially when it has to do with men, especially when it has to do with being seen. And so it's like, okay, I understand that was created like at a time where I had no choice. But now it's taken on such a momentum that it's actually acting really unkindly. And that can look like in your adult life, like teasing men, or like selling yourself out, right? When it's actually, when the reality is like, it's really painful to me to sell myself out. Like Caroline Myss talks about the inner prostitute. Like, it's actually really painful to do that, but I do it anyway, because that part of me that took over when I was 6 years old is still operating in my life, and it's actually taken on a life of its own, and it's actually rather aggressive. So to have the conviction to say like, okay, I see how that works, so I'm gonna do to the best of my ability, like I'm gonna try to feel what's real and important to me, and zero in on my values, and make decisions based on my values, not based on like what I can get from the external world, not based on being validated, not based on being approved of by men, not based on a sense of powerlessness, to the best of my ability. And doing these things and having the discipline and conviction to actually like make that decision within yourself that I will no longer do these things to the best of my ability, to the best of my ability. Sometimes you can't just like solve a pattern today, okay? Like there's certain patterns are so familiar to your mind that it's gonna take some time to really like and it's gonna take some addition of light, right? Some reinforcement of light and love in yourself to actually be able to even be aware of it, right? So to have compassion for that, but to whatever I can see right now. And so I could ask myself, in what situations do I lose my discernment? In what situations do I sell myself out? In what situations do I harm myself because I'm trying to be loving and spiritual? Like, in other words, when am I being the martyr? When am I trying too hard to save someone? An example of that is like if there's someone that you love in your life and they have a problem with addiction, and you try everything, you love them, you have conversations with them, you take them to therapy, you do everything in your power to try and support them, but they just won't change, because the only thing that brings a person out of that is that the desire to be free of it has to be greater than the desire to stay stuck in it. And so that's not your job. You can be there to help and support and to offer your love, offer a container of safety, but you have to use your intelligence and be like, okay, I see that this is not going anywhere. So that's it. I've done my best, and now that's it. I have the intelligence to know when to step back. So basically, look, the energy of conviction can be very healing, because if you get smarter than your trickster energy, right, and you have love and compassion, because all these things started because you you suffered an impact, you suffered a trauma, you suffered an experience that you didn't know how to handle. And so you have compassion for it. But the reality is, though, that here and now, right, it could look like, you know, if I'm not getting what I want in a relationship, I get really nasty and mean. I'll insult someone, you know, and so it's like, okay, to see it for what it is and see like, okay, trickster, I see you. I see that you are acting out, and I'm stronger than you. So I don't want to induce fear or powerlessness about the trickster in you. You are the creator of all this. You're more powerful. All of these things are like vaporous shadows compared to what you are. And so it's like, what I'm talking about is just having kind of the wisdom to know how to handle it, what quality of energy might be needed. And because people emphasize the energy of compassion, the feminine energy of compassion so much, sometimes they leave out conviction. And I've told lots of stories about how that was incredibly medicinal in my life. And if you even look at different enlightened masters throughout history, like, some of them had a lot of conviction, a lot of passion. Don't make images about what it means to be enlightened, right? Be with the reality of who you are, right? And don't try to superimpose other teachings or other teachers over yourself. And so for whatever it's worth, I just wanted to energize this, share it, for whatever it's worth. For whatever it's worth, take it or leave it. But the energy of conviction, being smarter, being hip to the way it works, being smarter than your survival programs. Because I can tell you also from experience that the reason why, if you're witnessing like a more aggressive part of your personality, and aggressive can be like that seduction back into, another great example is it seduces you back into confusion, and that's unconscious female energy. So like, let's say there's an unknown in your life and you've read like, okay, just relax to the best of your ability, open to possibility, like let go, detach from outcomes, like, you know this, right? But when an unknown comes in, like, you go into like chicken with the head cut off, right? This sense of overwhelm and sense of confusion. And I'm telling you from experience, because that used to happen to me. And this applies to disassociation as well. If you notice you're disassociating, if you notice you're in confusion, if you notice you're in overwhelm, and you say like, oh wait, that's just that part of my mind that's trying to kind of fool me back into low energy, you may very well snap out of it in that moment. Whereas if you're confused and overwhelmed, and you try to just send it love and compassion, right? Or try to just be totally present with it, that may be the medicine that you need in that moment. But sometimes conviction is the medicine that you might need in that moment, depending on who you are. I recognize again that what I say doesn't apply to everyone, and it doesn't apply to everyone in every moment either. But conviction is a healthy male energy. It's a moving forward energy. It's in order to even have true love and compassion, you need conviction. You need the ability to honor your values, to make decisions, and to set intentions. And that actually applies in your inner world sometimes, because there is no inner and outer. So how could it apply to the outer world and not apply to the inner world? So I hope I've shed some light on the value of conviction. Please know that I'm always coming from love, and that my intention is to help people, and that I understand some of the language I use sometimes will trigger you, but ultimately, like, I'm sharing what actually helped me. And if this doesn't actually help you, just tune out. You are free, right? So I hope you have a beautiful day.